Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live. Today, I've got a great friend of mine a and one of the top speakers in the USA and probably even worldwide. Patricia Fripp holds every speaking award given by NSA, which is the National Speaking Association of America, which is probably the global leader in speaking. She's also a fellow of the Professional Speaking Association here in the UK. Patricia picked up that award when she spoke at our conference in 2014. Thirdly, she's a good friend of mine, a coach, someone that helps me a lot, and a very interesting person. Like me, Patricia's a lifelong learner and has been seeking out some of the highest achieving people with the most knowledge very recently. Patricia, welcome to Monday Night Live. Thanks so much for joining us. Will you share now something you've been doing in the last 2 weeks? Because I know that you've been learning lots of new information.
Well, yes, and I didn't realize I was a fellow. I totally forgot. I see people advertise it, and I didn't know I was one. I totally forgot. Maybe I should add that to my bio. All right, Derek. Well, a day in the life of Fripp. We certainly had an agenda of what I could talk about. And then I thought, well, let's just be spontaneous and talk about what I've been up to. So I went to the Professional Speechwriters Association in Washington, D.C. I had 2.5 days, and I have a couple of comments from that. I had 2.5 days of museums, which I was in heaven. And then I spoke for the National Speakers Association in Washington, D.C. Then I came back to San Francisco after speaking at DC, and after a couple of days, I flew to Las Vegas for an Alan Weiss seminar. And Derek and I were laughing because Alan is the only one who has a full day seminar that ends at 2:15 in the afternoon. And this is constant with him. He has been known to say, oh, well, we're going to finish today and not do the last half day of like a 5-day seminar. And most of my comments will be what I learned from Alan. And then yesterday I gave the sermon at church. And one of my friends who knew this said, what's the difference between a keynote and a sermon? And I said, well, one, it's shorter. 2, there's no applause. And 3, it certainly has to tie into the reading, which I asked. Now, let's begin with the Speech Writers Association. Comparing this to the National Speakers Association is like night and day. The people who attend the Professional Speechwriters Association, many of them write for presidents of the United States. They write for military leaders, people who are really in the news, and every word counts. The first day, there was a 2.5-hour seminar from a gentleman who was a speechwriter for President Obama. And what I find very interesting is he worked as an intern in the White House, and 14 years later, they invited him to come back and be one of the writers for Obama. And President Obama says, I'm a better speechwriter than my speechwriters. And he said, all the speechwriters agree. However, when you're president of the United States, you do not have quite as much time as you might normally do. And he was actively involved. They would talk about what he wanted in his speech. They would send him drafts. And what was very interesting, the presenter showed us images of some drafts they sent him that Obama has writing all over the page, and others where he just has a few comments. And this, talking about variety of our presentations, he would talk about the presentation, he would show us some of the changes, and then he would show a video clip of Obama delivering part of the presentation they were talking about.
Wow.
There was a list of all the different ingredients they need for presidential addresses. And certainly they always send, if they're going to be out of the country or different places, really even in the country, they send an advance team to look at where is the right place to deliver the speech. Because the visual effect, do you have the White House behind you? With Reagan, are you standing at the Berlin Wall? And so one of the lessons we can all take from this is the setup of the stage. Now, even if we're in Zoom, that's our stage. Alan Weiss told a story last week about, as one of our odd couple seminars, I came down and there was a recording crew, and I said, Alan, what's going on? And he said, well, I'm going to record this next section about creating product, and I want it videoed so we could sell it after outside that event. And he said, would you like to do a segment? And I said, well, of course. And then he laughed about how I went and I changed clothes and I was putting a plant on the stage and I was cleaning up the set, which Alan doesn't put a lot of store to. It's all the content. But I'm sure you'll agree, visuals, when we're on stage, everything around us can add to or distract from the performance. Mm-hmm. An eye of something that is untidy or out of place can draw you when you're watching it away from the speaker. So that was a great lesson. Another presentation, a professor, he's head of the writing department in a Chicago university, a very academic, brilliant mind. And his 2.5-hour seminar was a little above my pay grade. But the last presentation, he analyzed the 272-word Gettysburg Address. And within it, he looked at every word, and there were 3 structures within this short presentation. And the repetitive words that he used, it was absolutely brilliant. And the question somebody asked that we were all thinking, did Lincoln realize all these structures that made this speech so brilliant? And his answer was, yes, because he did it.
You mean he wrote it? He wrote it.
He wrote it. I guarantee you, Lincoln or any one of us who constructed a good speech could not analyze it the way he did. And speechwriters are much more self-deprecating. He said it's a lot easier for a hack like me to analyze it than it was for him to write it. And what non-Americans might not realize, and some Americans might not either, Lincoln wrote that on the train on the way to delivering it. And also, he was not the keynoter. The keynoter spoke for 2.5 hours, and nobody really remembers. The power of well-chosen words. The power of well-chosen words.
Well, of course, that's always been your theme, hasn't it? It's always been your theme about loose language with everybody on this call.
Now, you're going to have to excuse me. My phone is going. Jeff, I can't talk. I'm on a webinar. Okay. All right. I've got a leak in my garden. I keep hearing from the water department, 7 gallons a minute or an hour. So my gardener's coming over to see if it's my my irrigation system. So sorry about that. I don't know if we can do some editing.
Are you on a water meter? Because that'd be quite expensive. I'm on a water meter.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
This is an
All
expensive
right. So
Zoom call for you.
let's look. Now, what did I do with my clicker? Here it is. So let us now look at Washington, let's look at the Washington, D.C. And Susan will confirm this. One of the ideas that you have heard me discuss is you-focused language, the importance of bringing your audience in. And if you are telling a story of your own, you can bring the audience with, I wish you could have been there. Let's go back to how often have you, what would you have done in this circumstance? This is a suggestion. And the whole program was on openings, and I bring people up and I coach them on the opening. And there was one woman who said, but you wasn't in that opening. And one of the attendees said to me in the break, what she is looking for is definitive answers of what you always do. And what you were doing is giving suggestions. And I understand if you're new to speaking or any other skill you're developing, that you want rules. Well, there aren't really rules. There are principles and theatrical choices. What we usually do as speakers are, these are techniques, suggestions, formulas, great lines, words to use, but that doesn't mean you can put every single one of them together at the same moment. Again, that's what, as I present this information in the future, I will make sure to emphasize. These are all suggestions and principles. Take what works, but there is no one word that is going to go in every opening line. So
That's really interesting, because clearly you as the guru, as the authority, they're taking every word you say.
No.
That's making me think about how I present sometimes as well. Thank you.
Good. So let's look at what we learned from Alan Weiss. Now, Alan, as you may know, has written over 50 books. He's known as the contrarian. He's written the $1 Million Speaker, the $1 Million Consultant. He's a very, very smart and successful person. There are others that say he is an acquired taste. I have always found Alan lots of fun to work with and brilliant to learn from. And what he was talking about in this seminar, which he's very good at, is when you are talking to a prospect, and so you are off script, you might have a formula you're trying to follow, but we're off script. So in the Q&A, we can discuss what's going on and what you might do. So the first, when you're talking to a prospect and you are asking them about what they want, one way you can respond is with one of your experiences. So for example, hang on. So for example, and I will just repeat some of the notes that I made. When I am talking to a tech company about getting their engineers ready for a user conference or a product launch, which is one way I make a good portion of my income, I like to revert to that sounds just like what I did for Nutanix. Nutanix was the first tech company that I created a whole way and formula of getting people who are all over the world ready for their presentations. So if you're talking to a prospect about what is ideal work for you, I would challenge you to think, and we can discuss after, what would be one experience that you would share that would match what they want? Then the second one was stories. Now, this could very much be similar to the Nutanix example. A story might be, and you say, well, this sounds, Derek, very much like when I was coaching Bernard for a very important presentation. So these are all part of your repertoire. We had a very famous comedian in America, Jerry Lewis, who said, my best ad libs take 8 hours to write.
Yeah.
Now, with a comedian, an ad lib, they said, why are we so good at ad libbing? Well, really, they are formulas. For example, my dear past John Cantu, who started the Holy City Zoo, would say a comedian would build a routine about my girlfriend lives in Berkeley. I take Bart to go over to see her, and she has a cat and different attributes. So when a comedian would open up to, what should we talk about? And they throw out ideas, anything to do with Bart, which is the transportation to get there, Berkeley or anywhere in the area, his girlfriend who's a nurse, the cat. So there are a lot of ingredients that whenever an audience member throws out anything related, they go into that routine. So it looks spontaneous. However, it's really already inside them. So I talk about being perpetually prepared. And this is another way of saying it. You're being spontaneous. However, you have a repertoire of what you will be spontaneous to. So we have your experiences, your stories, which are very similar, quotes. Now, for example, I might be talking to a speaker about promoting their business. Perhaps in my Tracy and I and Carl, when we're in my Fripp virtual training group meetings and someone has an issue. So how do I promote more? And this would be true for all of us who are mature. We have our following. Like with Alan Weiss, he always says, the same people turn up at his seminars who've been going for years. We have our following. And the quote I use is, when the editor of Rolling Stone magazine at a press conference asked my brother, Robert, what is the purpose of King Crimson's 50th anniversary tour? And my very brilliant brother said, to introduce King Crimson to innocent ears. In other words, when you go to a King Crimson concert, you do not take videos, you do not have photographs until the end. The music is very complex and they do not want all these flashes, distractions, because all the band members play in different time formulas, very complex. And David, his business partner and King Crimson's manager, said, we've been invited to perform at Rock in Rio. Now, Rock in Rio, there are thousands and thousands of people outside. They're all young. It's all video. It's all photos. And brother said, sounds like a good choice. We should say yes to. Because King Crimson has fans that were following them 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But the music has to be introduced to a younger set, which means you take different choices. So how can we all, as speakers, consultants, thought leaders, introduce our content, our ideas to innocent ears. So that would be a quote that I would use. It's in the repertoire to bring out whenever. Then there is the past usage. Past usage, and again, these can be lumped in similar categories, but it's what you have told or what you have told before, or a situation that you can bring into, of a situation where, well, I remember when I was introduced to Zebra Technologies to do some presentation training for them, what they found worked superbly well was, it's always good to give examples of clients from their point of view. This was their issue. This is what we suggested, and they found this very helpful. So it could very much work for you. So past usage, however you define that. And then, of course, pivot points. A pivot point is probably the most important, because you listen to what your prospect is saying about their needs and you immediately pivot to what you want to say. And the example he gave was, you were talking to someone who runs a big car dealership, and you were the consultant looking for a job. And, well, tell us about what your issues were. And Alan said, well, 3 times we sell 3 different types of cars. One is a lot more profitable than the other 2. And of course, we make a lot of money with our service. And then the consultant asks, well, tell us about your associates. And so the conversation is going on. And then we had to break into a duo and discuss with the other person, what would you say? And my partner is an expert in customer service. And so what she was taking off is when they were talking about their associates, and maybe we should train them better to give better customer service. And my comment to her was, what you're saying is fine, but this is not what you should be pivoting from. And then, because I said, what we are doing, and I would say we, meaning many of the people in the room, you pick up and pivot from the point of conversation that applies to your expertise. So I might say, well, let's look at what people say in their sales conversations. I didn't, though, because I was listening to my partner. But when we came back to Alan and people talked about what they had pivoted from, he said, no, you're all wrong. And I realized, because what he had said right at the beginning, our biggest money maker is the service, and everyone ignored. So either we can learn from the service. If that's the most profitable, this is where we should put attention to make it even more profitable.
So what did he mean by that? I'm not quite sure I got that.
All right. Well, Alan, and what Alan is brilliant at, better than anyone I've ever seen, and what we were there to learn, is how you can have spontaneous conversations, because most conversations with a prospect, we might have the questions we normally ask. However, we need to listen to what they say that might not be close to our expertise. because I have spoken to a few clients, and what their real issue has nothing to do with their sales presentations and conversations. And so in that case, I will say, it sounds as if you need help with negotiations, which is not my area of expertise. Let me introduce you to England's #1 negotiation expert, who was one of my good friends. What we all have to learn is, if we listen clearly and ask good questions, there are times to not try and squeeze our expertise into a problem they really don't think's a problem. Unless we genuinely know it's a problem and we ask more questions so the prospect realizes it's a problem. Because if we realize what is really the currency of our business, it's relationships. And that means we might have a good prospect that has a challenge, and it's not really our area of expertise. Although I certainly could help some people with their negotiations, I would not serve them well to say, I can help you. It would be much better to say, learn negotiations from my friend Derek, then let's have a conversation about the presentations and how they can better articulate perhaps what they've learned in the negotiation training.
Wow. Yeah, totally. Totally.
Because Alan, better than anyone, whatever you say, he can pick up on it, but he has an ear to know, no matter what people say, what they're really saying.
Yeah.
And all I will add to this is what I learned when I was delivering The Odd Couple with Alan. This was, and we used to advertise it: contentious, controversial, conflicting, controversial, contentious. Hear them agree and disagree on the matters that mean most to you. Because after our very first one, my very sweet friend Diane Parenti said, "Oh, Alan was so mean to Patricia." I said, "No, he wasn't. That was our act." You know, that's because conflict, if you look at comedy, if you look at movies, conflict is entertaining when you know the people genuinely like each other.
Patricia, just remind everybody, you did this in Las Vegas for a number of years with Alan Weiss, didn't you?
We did it multiple places. We did it San Francisco, Las Vegas, on the East Coast for 13 years.
Wow. So you were a double act in conflict with a big smile on your face.
We were a double acting conflict, but he said I came over to the dark side, so we had less differences at the end. But a couple of, and many of you've read Alan's books, but the options of yeses. So when you're sending a proposal, there is perhaps the lower, the medium, and the expensive offer. And really what you are looking for is the medium price, the one in between that you want, but you add a third option that's very expensive, thinking that the second option would look more appealing. And once in a while, you luck out and they say, "Oh, well, I want the whammo zammo."
Now, question there is,
then you've got to rush and hire some of your pals to help out.
does that go, does the expensive one go first, or does the expensive one go last?
No, lower. So, well, there's the $10,000 option, there's the $15,000 option, and then there's the $23,000 option.
You see, I thought you anchored the higher price first. Clearly, I was wrong there, and
Well, whatever works for you, Derek, whatever
Yeah,
works for you. I always do it this way.
interesting. Thank you.
And one other lesson I learned from Alan, which he really stresses, because his theme is value-based pricing. And I promise you, I really, as much as I've heard him talk about it, I'm not as good as I would like to be, which is why last year I took his course on getting higher fees. But what I did learn when I was talking to people about sales presentation training, I would say, well, how many salespeople do you do? What's an average sale? Not a big sale, but an average sale. You know, do you keep statistics on how often you close a sale after a presentation? And I know I was talking to one person, and this is the secret. And I don't work out maths quickly in my head. So I said, tell me. So you have 20 salespeople who deliver 2 presentations a month. And right now you are closing 1 out of 2. Congratulations. That's fabulous. Now, what would it be worth your company if you could sell 1.5 out of 2? And they have to do the math. And this is not a big sale, this is an average sale. So when they come back and say, well, $2 million, and they say, this sounds really good, what would it cost? And you can say with a straight face, based on the sales you are losing, my fee is inconsequential. Now, you're going to have to put it in the proposal, but that is what I learned from Alan. That was from The Odd Couple. But every time you have another experience, you get deeper into your understanding. And I'm sure with all of us who do speak, that would be the same with our clients and followers and listeners.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic, Patricia. Fantastic. Have you got any more slides, or we're almost out of time?
That's it. That's it.
Fantastic. One question before we wrap up, and that was fantastic. Lots of learning points. I've made lots of notes. What was the biggest highlight of your last 2 weeks?
Well, that's very difficult to select because they're all different. Obviously, it was quite pressure to give a sermon at your church. It was well received and probably one of the few note-free sermons that they would have heard at our church. And so people might say, how do you do that? Well, one, it's a logical structure. It's based on some content I have delivered before that comes from the presentations I deliver with my brother. And then it's repetition. You go over and over and over and over and over and over again. Is what I say to my clients. You need to know your presentation so well you can forget it. And I did forget one line I was going to put in the presentation. And you don't beat yourself up because the audience has no idea what you intended saying. So with that, everything was a highlight in lots of different forms.
Fantastic. And we look forward to seeing you in the UK next year. Can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give Patricia the usual round of applause in the normal way? Thank you so much for that. Patricia, thanks for joining us yet again. I know that you're joining us on the 16th of December for the Monday Night Live Christmas party online, which is fantastic. I hope everybody else can put that in their diaries. And I look forward to picking you up at Heathrow sometime towards the end of May next year, and I'll bring my audio recording machine so I can capture all your words of wisdom all in one go. Patricia Fripp, thanks for joining Monday Night Live, and I hope you stay on for a little while.
Will do.